Parents in the 1980s became filled with hysteria, labeling bands like Kiss and Metallica as the devil's music, while some Christian groups and leaders alleged that a harmless board game like Dungeons & Dragons was promoting witchcraft, self-harm, and influencing kids to commit real-life murders as well as other terrible crimes. The satanic panic is mirrored in Stranger Things Season 4 with the townspeople of Hawkins, when one of the townspeople dies or is murdered, and basically these people develop the herd mentality that the Hellfire Club is a satanic cult. Okay, now quick little spoiler warning, but I mean if you clicked on the video then I'm guessing I'm already spoiling the character of Season 4 anyways. If you haven't seen Season 4, I do talk about a few of the characters. Not really, it's more so the backstory or the inspiration for those characters, but Eddie's long, scraggly hair, obsession with Dungeons & Dragons, and penchant for heavy metal made him a target for bullies at Hawkins High, which, I mean, hey, I feel you, Eddie, but the United States in the 1980s was rampant with the satanic panic, which is a mass hysteria in which many believed that Satanist cults were committing ritualistic murders and taking over the country. The 80s sounded like some crazy times. I ain't even gonna hold you. Wasn't that the times of like disco and stuff too? So this country was going through some crazy shit. This was led by propaganda and has no basis. In fact, many individuals were wrongly accused and even convicted for sadistic crimes in which they had no involvement. Now, if Eddie's outcast turned into a scapegoat for this murder story kind of seems oddly familiar to you, that may be because it's actually based on a real life crime that took place in the early 90s. So the West Memphis Three are Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr., who as teenagers were convicted in 1994 of a triple murder in West Memphis. And basically Damien Echols, who was basically this kind of leader, is the inspiration for Eddie in Stranger Things Season 4. Echols, Baldwin, and Miskelly were all accused of killing 3 8-year-old boys, Chris Byers, Stevie Branch, and Michael Moore. Their trial, which included assertions that the killings were part of a cult ritual and subsequent convictions, set off a firestorm around the nation and the world. It inspired books, movies, and led to a movement to retry and free these people. And basically many people believe that these people were wrongly convicted. So on May 6, 1993, Byers, Branch, and Moore were found in a water-filled ditch less than 24 hours after their parents had reported them missing. The boys were naked, beaten, and hogtied. Byers had been castrated, and despite the violence of the crime, there was little evidence actually at the scene of the crime. Police was actually baffled at the fact that there was no blood and no fibers at the crime scene. It looked as though it had been swept completely clean. The state of the boys' bodies quickly inspired rumors that a satanic cult was responsible. The crime scene's location in the woods, the nudity, the positioning of the boys' bodies, and especially the castration caused concern about Satanism among the locals and amongst the police as well. Within days of the rumors, Gary Gitchell, who was the chief inspector, informed the public that the police were considering a number of possible explanations for the murders, one of which was cult activity. And throughout the investigation, the cult theory overshadowed more traditional theories, such as the speculation that the boys were murdered by somebody that they actually knew and not just a random cult killing. Jerry Driver was a juvenile probation officer for the Crittenden County who believed that there was a satanic cult in the area. Much of that belief was a result of his dealings with Damien Echols. The more that Driver interacted with Echols, the more convinced he became that Echols was involved in a satanic cult. Echols denied any connection with Satanism, but did admit to believing in and practicing magic.
The reason that bad things happen to you is because you're a dumbass.
Driver shared his suspicions with the West Memphis police. Now, Jason Baldwin was actually friends with Echols, both of them being social outcasts. Although Baldwin did well in school and did not join in Eddie's experimentation with magic, despite those many differences, they actually did spend a great deal of time together. And then the third and final suspect, who was Jesse Miskelly, he actually had very little connection to either Echols or Baldwin. However, he babysat for Vicky Hutchinson, a woman who volunteered to help the police investigate, and Hutchinson began to actually ask Miskelly questions about the case, and he offered to introduce her to Damien Echols, who was already an established suspect at this point. Hutchinson told police that she persuaded Echols to take her with him to a witches gathering and that Miskelly went with them. As a result, Miskelly was taken to the police station for several hours of questioning, of which just over 30 minutes were recorded. At the end of the questioning, Miskelly confessed. Miskelly's confession, however, was inconsistent with details of the crime of which police were already aware, and while confessing, Miskelly at times contradicted his own story as well. And in spite of the potential problems with Miskelly's confession, the police arrested him, Echols, and Baldwin on June 3rd, 1993. Almost immediately after confessing, Miss Kelly recanted. He stated that he had been confused by the behavior of the police and had attempted to cooperate without realizing the implications of his statements. Now, during the process of gathering evidence, blood was found on a knife previously owned by John Mark Byers, who was actually Chris Byers' stepfather, and Byers had given the knife away shortly after the murders had happened. The blood was determined to be consistent with Chris Byers' blood as well as with Mark Byers' blood. However, the police did not pursue this potential lead. The police also failed to pursue a potential lead caused in by the local Bojangles restaurant. Basically, one of the employees witnessed a disoriented man covered in mud and blood enter the restaurant the night the boys went missing. The man used the restaurant, leaving smears of blood all over the walls. Though police did take evidence of this blood, they actually never pursued this lead, and later they lost this evidence. They lost the blood samples. Does that make sense?
How do you fuck that up?
So because Miss Kelly had actually confessed to the police at one point, his trial was separate from Baldwin and Eccles, and they basically wanted him to testify against Baldwin and Eccles, but Miss Kelly had ended up refusing to do that, and he continued to say that he wanted to recant his statements originally because he was confused. Both trials actually drew in a ton of media attention, and there were a ton of legal complications during this case. Basically, they had to figure out which evidence could actually be submitted before the jury, which evidence was the jury allowed to actually hear, including testimony from a cult expert who indicated that the defendant's music collections and clothing were key factors of a satanic cult activity. The other evidence presented to the juries was similarly circumstantial. So basically, they were kind of just fed a ton of bullshit at the end of the day. They were just saying like, oh yeah, look at the way they dress, you know? I mean, their hair, like, that's exactly what I see in satanic cults. And this is from a cult expert. The boys' defense attorney failed to present more substantial evidence regarding the nature of the police investigation or the retraction of key testimony and evidence. And basically at both trials, the juries determined that the defendants were guilty. Miss Kelly and Baldwin both received life, and Miss Kelly actually also got an additional 40 years on top of that, and Eccles received the death penalty. After the initial trials, the West Memphis 3's defense teams attempted numerous appeals claiming trial misconduct, presented new evidence, and challenged rulings against the inclusion of evidence that the defense lawyers felt would be beneficial to their case. Outside of the courts, the case continued to fall apart. Vicky Hutchinson claimed that she had committed perjury when she testified against the three and stated that the police had told her actually what to say. That's a force. The foreman of the jury was also accused of misconduct after it came to light that during the trial he had discussed the case at length with his own attorney. The accusation of juror misconduct combined with the new evidence showing that DNA found at the crime scene matched Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather, was eventually used to secure a new hearing. So finally the boys actually got a new hearing after a ton of evidence was brought up and a ton of misconduct stuff was actually figured out about this whole trial. The West Memphis 3 case has inspired numerous individuals to intervene on their behalf. Bruce Sinofsky and Joe Berlinger created a documentary about the West Memphis 3 called The Paradise Lost: The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, and released it in 1996, hoping to encourage the public to basically keep on being interested in this case and interested in the fate of these three people. They actually traveled to Arkansas to visit Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly in October of 1996 upon deciding that they believed that the West Memphis 3 were innocent. All right, the three friends created a website called Free the West Memphis 3 to inform the public about the case as well as to ask for donations to help for their defense teams. Another woman named Mara Leverett, who was an Arkansas reporter, actually wrote a book titled The Devil's Knot: The True Story of the West Memphis 3 in 2002, and which was actually in response to a challenge made by state officials that a true, honest examination of the case would prove the guilt of the three defendants. After extensive research, Leverett concluded that the entire situation was a tragedy and a gross miscarriage of justice. All right, numerous celebrities agreed with Leverett. Eddie Vedder of the rock group Pearl Jam visited Eccles on death row and used his music and fame to spread the message that Eccles and the others were innocent. Even actor Johnny Depp and singer Natalie Maines of the group The Dixie Chicks also lent their support. Shout out to Johnny Depp.
The crime of which you've been found guilty of is being innocent of... Savvy?
Like, Oh my God, I just seen his whole trial thing. I just watched that, caught up with that whole thing. He was even showing support to people back then, so he's a real one. On November 4th, 2010, after numerous failed appeals, the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered that a hearing take place in order to analyze new evidence that had the potential to exonerate the West Memphis Three. Preparations began immediately, and Echols hired a new defense team that included Steven Braga and Patrick Beneca. Now, I'm not really too hip with famous lawyers or anything, but I'm assuming that they're really good if they're mentioned in here. However, as the new lawyers worked to present their case at the hearing, they were dismayed to find that the new evidence did not conclusively point to a different perpetrator. As typical for this case, the evidence was only circumstantial. Now, Braga and Benka, convinced that the West Memphis Three were innocent and deserved their freedom, decided to take a different approach. Benka had a working relationship with Arkansas Attorney General Dustin McDaniel. The two met to discuss the case, and during that meeting, Benka asked Daniel if his team would consider skipping the hearing in order to move straight to a new trial. The judge, Benka argued, would certainly grant new trials after considering the jury misconduct discovery years before. As negotiations between the lawyers continued, Benka and Braga suggested that the sides agree to an Alford plea with time served in order to avoid the risk that the new trial would bring. An Alford plea would require the three defendants to plead guilty to a series of lesser charges, while at the same time stating for the record that they were innocent and only pleading guilty because it was in their best interest. So both legal teams agreed that the plea would be acceptable provided that the three defendants were willing to cooperate. On August 19th, 2011, Judge Laser approved the Alford plea. Each of the defendants pleaded guilty while remaining their innocence and were released with time served. Now, after 18 years, one of Arkansas's most controversial murder cases came to a strange, semi-permanent close. Benka suggested that the defense team would continue pursuing the West Memphis Three case by petitioning Governor Mike Beebe for pardons. However, suggested that those petitions would be unsuccessful, so he wasn't even trying to give those out. Now, despite the release of the West Memphis Three, the case remains unsolved, and the legal conduct of both the prosecution and the defense remains relatively unexamined. They never looked into the way that these people were acting during the original trial, how no evidence was looked at, how basically the defense really wasn't even really defending them, wasn't bringing up any points to defend them, or anything like that. Prosecutors will not continue to investigate the murders of Stevie Branch, Chris Byers, and Michael Moore. Echols, Miss Kelly, and Baldwin will not receive compensation for the time spent in prison, and they may never be cleared of the crimes for which they pleaded guilty. However, the case continues to inspire media attention. So, honestly, Echols and stuff, they got fucked. Like, let's be honest, guys. Like, you spent 18 years in prison, you didn't get no compensation for it. They just assumed because you had long hair, you liked heavy metal, and you played Dungeons and Dragons. To me, bro, that sounds like the type of person that is not doing anything like that. If you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I am automatically assuming you are probably in the house. Nerd! You know what I mean? I didn't even think Dungeons and Dragons was real. I thought it was literally only in TV shows and stuff. It's crazy to me, but RIP to Stevie Branch, Chris Byers, and Michael Moore. Hopefully that gets solved at some point. Now we got crazy DNA stuff, so hopefully that comes out at some point, but either way, RIP to them. And basically the latest update that I could find on this case was that in July 2021, Echols' attorneys actually were trying to get access to the evidence from the crime scene, the original crime scene, but it was basically lost or misplaced or destroyed in a fire were their exact reasons. All right. Later investigation actually found out that most of the evidence still remains intact, and basically Damien Echols filed suit for access to the remaining evidence for advanced DNA testing, like I just said, you know what I mean? Probably the smartest idea. But on June 23rd, 2022, just a couple months ago, Circuit Judge Tanya Alexander ruled against him. So basically, Echols will never get to actually get access to that unless maybe he gets another new judge or something like that. And as of now, that is the end of this case. I can see how Damien Echols inspired Eddie and the whole D&D and them blaming that character. I'm not trying to spoil too much. That character's murder on him specifically and that group. But anyways, if you haven't watched the show, make sure you watch it. Another new video coming out later this week. Should be another part of an Iceberg or something. You know what I mean? I've been trying to record. I've just been trying to find time for it, man. Other than that, if you haven't checked out my last video, I got a kitten. Here she is. Miggy. Yeah, that's her. She cute. But yeah, other than that, I should have this thing out in a couple days. And make sure you stay dangerous, get laid, and I'll catch y'all later. Just appreciate you watching. Make sure you like and subscribe too. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a girl. That's it.